Hello and welcome all to our opening show of the Digital Economy Reloaded, AI-driven digital transformation. My name is Chetan. I'm a Gen Z digitalization expert, venture entrepreneur, and executive producer of the Digital Pioneers Dialogue. Alongside me is my co-founder of Digital Pioneers Dialogue, a colleague and leading industry AI expert, Mark Minovich, as well as Ben Levy, co-founder of Bootstrap Labs of the Silicon Valley venture capital scene. And together, we will moderate today's discussion, in which we are honored to present the following guests who join us on screen today. We have Sylvain Duranton, Managing Director and Senior Partner of BCG, Igor Jablokov, CEO and founder of Pryon, Chetan Dube, CEO of IPSoft, Dr. Osvald Bjelland, Chairman and CEO of Xynteo and founder of TPT, Strier, Vice President of Worldwide AI Initiatives at NVIDIA, and Kris Fitzgerald, Vice President and CTO of NTT Data. So we welcome you all so warmly to today's exciting series. And before we get into the main discussion, I will briefly provide a synopsis of today's dialogue, and Mark will then follow with a brief bio on all of our guests as well. We will be focusing our discussion on how COVID has not only impacted our global economy, but we also want to take a deep dive into how coronavirus has caused a sudden digital push, inspiring innovators around the world to search for AI-fueled solutions to aid and even optimize the impacted industries. We also want to get to the bottom of the current state of digital transformation and how enterprises are adjusting and leveraging the situation, talk about some of these issues from a Gen Z perspective and integrating components of VC and the investment climate, and lastly, how existing AI-driven solutions can help us rethink the way in which we live and work in this reloaded post-COVID world. With that, I pass it on to Mark Minovich to introduce everybody formally.
Thank you very much, Angelica. It is my honor and privilege to welcome our distinguished guests that are joining us today on this special program, globally, worldwide. We thank you and thank you for the time that you are giving us today and your insights in this very unpredictable time that we call new normal or the new reality. So with this in mind, before we begin with bios, I want to acknowledge the presence of a dear friend and visionary who is joining us today on this call and who is coaching and guiding this initiative. Malcolm Carter, award-winning filmmaker and director. Over the last 20 years, his work has appeared on 544 television networks in 155 countries and reached a combined global audience of over 2 billion viewers. Malcolm is passionate about using the power of film to make a difference in the world by communicating messages to the masses. He worked with NASA and was the director of the Asian Winter Games for the International Olympic Committee. Malcolm has 25 Motion Picture Awards nominations, and he deserves the recognition here today. We thank you, Malcolm. I would like to proceed with the distinguished panelists that we have on the line here today. And first, I would like to start with Sylvain Duranton, who is the managing director, a senior partner of Boston Consulting Group, a global leader of BCG Boston Gamma, a business unit dedicated to data science and advanced analytics applied to business. He manages a team of 850 plus data scientists and provides support to businesses in the field of artificial intelligence for companies across the world. Sylvain advocates for a human plus AI approach, using AI systems alongside humans, not instead of them, and shares the specific formula companies can adopt to successfully employ AI while keeping humans in the loop. Sylvain joined BCG in 1993. He is also a member of the marketing and sales global leadership team. He is the founder and president of the Chess Club. He is also an executive board member, one of the largest French NGOs, aims to alleviate poverty and improve access to housing. Our next distinguished guest, Chetan Dube, founder and CEO of IPSoft, the largest privately owned AI company. Chetan has served as the president and CEO since inception in 1998. During his tenure, he has led the company to create a radical shift in the way IT is managed and passionate evangelist for digital revolution. Prior to joining IPSoft, Chetan has served as the assistant professor at New York University, where his research was focused on nothing else but deterministic finite state computing engines. While at NYU, he began exploring the artificial intelligence principles and philosophies that form the basis of the current Amelia platform. He has been fascinated by Turing Enigma, which examines whether machines could think. His research has been focused on deep AI. He pioneered the use of AI-enabled digital labor across the industries and has been awarded several U.S. patents for developing cognitive models. Our Ernst & Young has recognized him as Entrepreneur of the Year for leading research in artificial intelligence, emulating human thinking, and approaching the Turing horizon. Chetan envisions the world where humans and machines work closely together to build a radically more efficient and better planet. My next guest is Dr. Osvald Bjelland, Chairman and CEO of Xynteo, founder of the Performance Theater Foundation in Norway. Xynteo is a high-level advisory firm and think tank serving the global business leadership. Osvald is an entrepreneur and an academic. He founded the Performance Theater for focusing an annual forum to inspire the world leaders from across all disciplines and geographies to identify and chart out a path through the key challenges to global business likely to emerge over the next 3 to 6 years. Osvald is passionately working with business leaders to reinvent growth through sustainability, through purpose, through resilience, through talent, through digitalization. He has written for and been interviewed by various publications, including Fortune Magazine, Financial Times, and MIT Sloan Review. Our next guest, Kris Strier, Vice President of the Worldwide AI Initiatives at NVIDIA. He leads the worldwide AI initiatives at NVIDIA, and he also leads something called AI Nations, the worldwide program that helps government leaders and stakeholders develop plans to implement growth. Kris works with senior leaders across public and private sectors in all markets to help them understand the new art of possible with artificial intelligence, using GPUs, using autonomous machines, using IoT at scale. Kris is a former global AI leader for Ernst & Young. He's the former global chief digital officer for Deloitte. 20 years of record as a trusted advisor, as a practice leader. He's particularly proud for his role in advising the government of Estonia at the United Nations Center of AI and Robotics and Canadian Blood Services. He, in his role, he led the AI strategy as to the CIO of Estonia and was profiled by Wall Street Journal. The next guest, Kris Fitzgerald. Kris Fitzgerald is the Chief Technology Officer of NTT Data Services. He leads the company's global intelligent automation technology strategy. In addition, Kris leads client innovation programs, leveraging NTT's global R&D, and has over 40 years of progressive experience in industries and IT. He currently serves as a member of University of Texas Johnson School of Engineering and the distinguished member of the Computer Science Executive Council. With this in mind, I want to pass this on to Ben Levy, who is the co-founder of one of the leading venture capital groups in Silicon Valley, and he will introduce our guest as well. Ben.
Thank you so much, Mark. Again, privileged to be co-hosting this show together. It's my privilege to introduce Igor Jablokov. Igor is actually the founder and CEO of one portfolio company called Pryon. The company is actually an AI focused on augmented intelligence. The company's cognitive technology helps better understand human beings and putting AI at the very core of the enterprise and accelerating digital transformation. What people may not know about Igor is that Igor is really a pioneer in the industry. He was actually the founder of a company called Yap, which only 5 years after its creation was acquired by Amazon to become the core technology block for the Alexa technology that we all use in our homes, impacting, millions and actually billions of people around the world through Alexa and Fire TVs and other Echo devices. Is now, at it again, reinventing the way we're going to basically pioneering AI in the enterprise. And so Igor was really itching to leave the corporate world at some point, thinking that AI was not moving fast enough, not becoming practical enough. And so I think that's what's been driving his journey. He's also incredibly the recipient of both an Eisenhower and Truman National Security Fellowship that basically, explore the way venture capital and entrepreneurships are really able to positively impact the geopolitical landscape as well as natural, economical growth. And last but not least, Igor is something that pays forward. He spent a lot of his time thinking about how to support young entrepreneurs. You talked about Gen Z earlier, Angelica, I think. Igor cares a lot about young talents and their development, and is very focused on enabling these talents to grow and especially in the STEM field. So again, I think fantastic group today and looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ben, and to all of our participants that have joined us today. We want to start with some questions now, and those questions are going to be individualized to the participants. We'll also be asking general questions. I want to start the questions now with our distinguished guest, Dr. Osvald Bjelland, and the question is, Osvald, you came from humble backgrounds, living in a small piece of land, deep fjord and mountainside. In 1960s, migration and relocation to the farms and other places have begun. You are very proud of the family heritage and have lived in Norway since then. As you say, people in Norway are comparatively meager resources at that time, but were able to thrive, to improve the quality of life, and also improve the life of the community. This is the story of Norway. This is your story. Can you share with us how did the country gone from one of the European's poorest countries to one of the most prosperous? And can you also talk about your personal quest, your personal mission to recreate growth for our planet? What are some of the learnings that you could share with this group and the monumentous work that you're doing, the specific efforts that you are most proud of?
Thank you very much, Mark. It's wonderful to be with you all, and thank you for the invitation. You know, as our friends in Sweden would say, the Norwegians are modest people and they have a lot to be modest about. Of course, for a very long time, we were surviving in a harsh environment. But I think the 2 or 3 things that has helped us a lot is, so today Norway is a vibrant, very successful country. And I think number 1 is a outward orientation. That sometimes your weakness becomes your strength. We basically had mass migration to America. My family, they all ended up in the state of Washington or Seattle, etc. But outward orientation, where we learned a lot, we brought it back to the country. The second, whether you look at shipping or trade, stock trade, or the recent 40 years with oil and gas, it's all a partnership story. So we have worked with the most resourceful people around and learned a lot. And then, of course, it's also very much a matter of values. And we see this around the world. You see, with our Lutheran background, we always felt guilty if we didn't work. And once we started to make an enormous amount of money, we felt guilty if we spend it. So we ended up accumulating it. And now we have the world's largest fund. That is really a matter of values. A lot of other countries have had the enormous blessing from a resource economy, but there is nothing left in the end. So I think that's on that question. I don't know, Mark, if you would like me to continue on your second question, which has to do with my own work.
Yes, please.
Yes. So to make a long story short, I do believe. If we go back all the way to Adam Smith and this whole idea to organize our existence in market supply and demand. So the market economy has produced an enormous amount of progress for us, and not least in the last 100 years. But I do believe that the market economy, we actually have to do something extraordinary to rescue capitalism as we know it. Because at least we have 3 problems. The one is a market economy, a capitalism that is created an untenable stress between us and the physical world. Number 2, and this is not a problem anymore in just certain countries, but it is the problem between the few and the many. And you, Mark, know that I'm not the Marxist. I've been an entrepreneur and capitalist thriving in the market all my life. But if you look at the inequality that is showing up everywhere today, that is a problem. And the third problem that we have to bear in mind is how we maximize outcomes, financial outcomes, short term, to the detriment of a longer term perspective. So when we work with global companies, we see many of them being very, very aware of their license to operate. How do you innovate? You look at Ajay Banga and MasterCard, financial inclusion, they just have a different approach. And that is also giving them enormous returns in the marketplace, in the capital market.
Thank you very much, Osvald. I want to go now to Chetan. And the question that I have for you, can you share with us also your background and how you grew up to love math and computer science? How did you end up at New York University focusing on modeling of system engineering brains with deterministic finite state machines, if we could even say it? And what inspired you to set up IPSoft and create Amelia rather than continuing the research?
Thank you, Mark. It's really a privilege to be along with such distinguished panelists here. My story is very modest. It's basically my research was collecting dust on the 12th floor of Courant Institute of Mathematical Sciences, and I felt that if all the research is just going to, I remember stumbling into the library on the 12th floor and picking up one of the journals which had one of my works, and it literally had dust on it. So that's how useful my work was to that date. And I felt that there has got to be a practical way for me to apply this deterministic finite state modeling. And I happened to, the person to blame is Turing, whose research I stumbled upon. And if you've read his thesis, it starts by saying, I propose for you to consider the question, can machines think? And what if sincerely thinking machines were possible that mimicked the human level of thinking capabilities, not the ones that, not the different mutations of dialogue flow that do decision tree and what Kris Fitzgerald calls IVR 2.0 quite accurately. I would say that, but what if you really got close to mimicking human intellect, and what would the world be like, and what would be the efficiencies that you could drive, and what would be the minimum viable incomes that you could drive, and what kind of an impact could you have in such a machine? So that question has haunted me for the last 2.5 decades of research.
Thank you very much, Chetan, for that. I would like to go now to the question for Kris Fitzgerald, if I may. Kris, you started your career in 1970s. Technology was something new and not embedded in everyday life. Since then, the world has shifted 180 degrees, and now we're in the middle and post-COVID world. Hopefully, I'm saying that with a smile, and hopefully our countries and our nations would be able to do a lot more to take us further. Can you share some lessons from your life that matured you to become a leading chief technology officer?
Appreciate it, Mark, and thanks for the invitation. I think of it probably in 4 buckets. One, never stop learning. The second you stop doing the research, the analysis, reading, sharing these conversations, and learning isn't just listening, it's also teaching. You've always got to be challenging yourself. And I'd say second thing is embrace change. I remember when I started IT, it was like, if it's not broken, don't break it. And I think it's changed to, if it's not broken, break it. Don't be satisfied with the norm. If you wake up in the morning and said, if I were starting a brand new company, would I do this the same way today? And if the answer is no, then go change it. Okay, it's going to happen. Thirdly is you got to be able to recognize patterns. I'm always amazed by the cycles we go through and get surprised by, oh, wait a minute, if we have bad data, then AI is not very good. Well, we've had bad data issues since the 1960s. But it seems like every 10 years, like a new generation goes, oh my gosh, we got to have good data. So recognize the patterns. They repeat themselves. Look back to history. And I'd say the fourth piece, Mark, is always making it relevant to who you're working with. It's not, Chetan's issue about research on dust. If you think about it, if you're having a conversation or working with a solution or working with your clients or your constituents, it has to be relevant to them. It has to be in their language and relevant. And keep it relevant means that for you, you're always in that ability to drive and create impact.
Thank you very much, Kris. I want to ask the next question to Keith Strier. Your background is 20 years, Keith, as I mentioned, in Big Four consulting.
Yeah.
As a senior partner at Deloitte and then Ernst & Young, but now you're focused on helping countries, incredible cause on deploying the world's most powerful AI supercomputers. How did you make this switch, and why did you make that switch?
Yeah, it's, I was really lucky to spend most of my career at those two firms. They're high integrity, high performing cultures, and I had great mentors, great colleagues, just a great experience. But after 17 years of talking about what people should do and laying out strategies and facilitating the conversation, I just had this itch to kind of get to the other side. Now I wasn't anxious to leave Ernst & Young. It's a great firm, but I was anxious to sort of get the experience of being part of the solution itself. And you don't walk away from a senior partner role easily. So, it had to be something very, very special. And frankly, the opportunity to work with Jensen Huang at NVIDIA, to be in the orbit of one of the most brilliant minds of our generation. I mean, he's not just a great a great CEO. I mean, he's an engineer. The Stanford School of Engineering is named after him. I mean, he invented an entire form of computing that, frankly, most people in the world probably don't know who he is. So outside of our geeky world, nerdy world here, but it was a real privilege. So coming onto that side was really, that was the golden ticket, really. And so I made the leap about a year ago.
Thank you very much, Keith. The next question I have is for our colleague Sylvain, who is joining us from France. Can you tell us about your own career? What brought you to Boston Consulting Group, and this, maybe a little bit about a special sauce on working at BCG? You grew up in Nice before joining Paris, studying at Polytechnic, École Polytechnique. I understand also a friend who was at BCG convinced you to join, and ever since that moment, you've been very much involved at guiding the strategy at BCG at various roles around the world. So share a little bit with us, please.
So you're right. What brought me into BCG, Mark, is basically a friend who told me you should just, try to get a chance and see whether you like it. I joined. I liked it tremendously. I liked a lot the international exposure. Kris was talking about integrity, which is a very important value, and I've also experienced that. Lots of friendship in this company. I was trained in two fields. The first one was sociology, the other one was math. So because I was like some sort of math guy, I was asked to take care of the pricing topic, which is quite a quantitative topic, obviously. And because of the sociology background, I was also into organization dynamic, and all these things about how to change people's behavior. And for me, when I was asked to found Gamma, our AI entity, I had the privilege to merge my two lives, basically. My math life with AI, but my sociology life also, because I really think that the main challenge, and Christopher was saying that, is about bringing AI to the people, making it relevant for the people, and you get into the much more human aspect of the thing than the tech or math aspect. So I'm thrilled with what I'm doing because I can play on those two legs or two passions of my life, math and also sociology and human behaviors.
Thank you very much, Sylvain. I would like to now pass this to Ben to ask some general questions that you're seeing and hearing in Silicon Valley on digitalization. And then Angelica joins with some of the questions that are in the minds of the younger generation. So Ben, to you, please.
Yeah, I think, thank you. I think to close the loop, I think on introduction, I'd love to have Igor maybe share a bit of his background as well. Share with us a bit your journey.
Sure. So I was born in Greece on a tiny island called Poros, and my parents were both artists. And so those were my formative years. When I came to the US, not speaking English, mathematics and sciences obviously end up being a universal common language. And while my parents put a paintbrush in one hand and the bow of a violin in another, I was peeking at the early computer magazines and things of that sort. And just FaceTiming with my mother yesterday, she's like, I kept buying them for you, but I was always puzzled if you actually understood what was in them or not. So that was the early formative years. I ended up joining IBM, and towards the second half of my career there, I started in microelectronics. in order to get a systems perspective on building these style of platforms. But then I started leading the multimodal research team, where we invented the first voice-enabled web browser in order to create more opportunities for accessibility. And then we started discovering the fusion of cloud, of mobile, of set-top boxes, and all of these style things. And when we kept trying to greenlight what today we know as you know, AI cloud and AI assistants and what have you, it just never could meet the business case that was necessary in order to greenlight it. And so in my frustration in 2006, we ended up leaving. By 2007, we were showing baby Alexa in the palm of our hands on an AT&T flip phone, a Razr phone, at the first TechCrunch Disrupt conference. Again, nobody knew what we were talking about. And so a lot of folks started approaching us to use our cloud-based service for transcribing phone calls, transcribing voicemails, messaging, voice search, and the like. And that's what we ended up doing for years, while we still maintained a Skunksworks project to build that assistant that was in our blood, if you will, in our fascination. And then that's when the team had a choice between exiting to Google or Amazon, and they wanted to go where there was essentially a blank slate opportunity to help direct the future of the company. And so now, in many ways, we want to be the sonic boom of our own work, where we were behind the scenes. One of the things that I didn't say in 2007 is we were, since we had some of the early iPod engineers working for us that, funny enough, we hired out of NVIDIA, because NVIDIA ended up acquiring a company called Portal Player. We were already prototyping with Apple an early AI assistant before they acquired the Siri team. And so now we felt this stuff will come to work as well, but not in the way that people expected. You can't just take the literal Alexa or the literal Siri and bring it to work because of all the challenges associated with that. So that's what we're focused on.
Great, thank you, Igor. I think that great context, and I think no better panel to really start jumping into the heart of the topic today. I think what's happening is everybody's talking about digital transformation, but has been talking about it for years. It sounds like that's the answer to every problem, from supply chain to fintech to healthcare. Of course, we see a lot of healthcare these days with what's going on. But I think, almost to the point where people say, look, unless you transform digitally and you transform now and faster than ever before, you will face basically potential death as a corporation. We've seen companies being disrupted for the last 50 years faster than ever before. And so in that context, again, open to the entire panel here, taking turns, what do you recommend today for leaders and CEOs and executives to think about when it comes to how can you accelerate digital transformation? And it's really about happening now, because otherwise the consequences, you have already suffered the consequences of not being fast enough. I think the market has been really severely punishing every corporation that has not been able to transition from offline to online. And so with that, I'd like to open it to the floor, and please jump in.
This is Keith. I'll start. A couple of years ago, McKinsey wrote a report that offered up a phrase that I really think is relevant here, and it's kind of stuck with me, which is they used the word insurmountable advantage. And they were talking about, they were assessing the companies that have made early investments in this technology and what were the early results. And the hypothesis was, the companies that were getting ahead, the industries that were investing early, were not just gaining an edge, because that's one way to say it, but they were gaining an insurmountable advantage, which are very specific use of words. And I think that is clearly playing out as we start to see companies that are not just leading or winning, but they're crushing and dominating industries. And I think that probably one of the nuanced aspects of that, it gets lost in the in that conversation, is that you just, AI is some silver bullet. You just make an investment, you deploy it, and you're good to go, and it'll solve all your problems. That's clearly not the case. The fact is, the companies that are winning are starting to show that insurmountable advantage, have been investing for years, have lost money, have gone through many failed projects and pilots, had to learn along the way. This is, as one of the earlier speakers was referring to their IT career, the AI is not IT, right? The playbook for IT, the playbook for software doesn't apply here. So I think learning the new playbook, which may even be unique to your company, your industry, going through that journey of mistakes and investments and taking that, that's the necessary price of admission to acquire that insurmountable advantage. You can't microwave your way to that success. So that's one of my observations.
So I think that perspective is phenomenally interesting, and also this comment on insurmountable advantage. You see, what we are seeing a little bit today is that if you look for large energy companies, they are not up against the challenge of fixing one energy investment, but they need to look at the energy system. If you look at healthcare, I just spoke with a friend in India on Sunday, and know that 24% of the people being tested are positive to COVID, and you have a broken healthcare system. It's a horrible situation. Then you look at transport. We need to fix the transport systems. I have a question. So clearly, artificial intelligence and technology is key to all these systemic changes. But what we experience is like a pretty profound leadership deficit, where there are very few people who both understand how the systemic challenge and how to deploy technologies.
Thank you, Osvald. I want to pose another question to Kris Fitzgerald, and I want to pose it in this following way. Kris, you believe that the number one thing in the world of IT and even outside of IT, we need to be open to change, right? Based on what you said, based on rapidly changing landscape, it's important to understand, internationalize, then share or lead the adoption of new technologies while enabling your team. You then said perhaps one of the most important factors is the ability to put thoughts into the presentation, documents, and share it with the clients, not just have this technology sitting, that technology. How do you create the digital transformation change and then communicate to the stakeholders, the team and the board? And this is what important, I think, for the audience and for the panelists here. Is it possible for you to comment?
Yeah, and so I'll go back to one of Osvald's comments, because there is a bit of a gap between what the tech is able to do and our appetite to absorb it and our patience. And then when you take, as you mentioned, the COVID pivot, and I would use that word highlight, pivot, because what might have been a thought we had 4 months ago is totally changed. And so I think our challenge is that we have to step back and understand that there's kind of three prioritizers to it. There's a stability prioritization. Your issue about healthcare with the number of people being tested, death things, there's a stability issue. If we can't solve supply chain instability, we don't have permission to change. Okay. I think number two is we got to step back and say, okay, once I've done that, I need to take out and simplify. I've got too much stuff going on that doesn't add the value, that's not creating that change, to be able to focus and invest on those key things I need to do. And then be willing to take the measured bets. And that takes a bit of a leadership focus, which is I can't make 20 bets. I got to pick the 2 or 3 that are relevant to my clients. Where do I have permission? I think in our industries, we have permission to take certain bets. I'd like the idea of, we took a bet with one of our partners, that's Chetan with IPSoft, and launched in 2 weeks a COVID-based conversational agent to handle thousands of inquiries around COVID issues, launched with a healthcare company. It was a measured bet we took together, but we pivoted and said, we got to do this fast, 2 weeks. Not 2 months, not 2 years, 2 weeks, but a measured bet, and invest in those, and have the fortitude to look beyond a quarter, but in fact, do it on a few things, not the old shotgun approach of handling 15 or 20. And I say the last piece is we've got to reopen our thinking into how do we do things differently from the people. Your point about, I think it was Sylvain, around combination of math and behavioral science. If I think of where all this stuff is taking us, it's no longer an IT-only anchor. And people too much think about, well, I don't want to go into IT because IT is geeky or I'm kind of behind the walls, et cetera. IT needs to be it again. And the things that drive IT aren't just IT. It's the behavioral, it's the art, it's the ethical side of it. And in fact, if we can get people around that together, we're going to go faster because we're not thinking the same way. What makes us work better is to not have all the same thinkers in the room together.
Thank you very much, Kris. Another question that I have for you in the same thinking, and then pass this on to other distinguished panelists to debate and discuss. You have also recently authored a piece. How long are we going to be living the future of work, and how are we living the future of work? As companies prepare for whatever global crisis comes next, they put systems in place to make the workforce more flexible, more mobile, meet business demands securely, and from any location, as we now see it in COVID-19 crisis. Whatever global crisis that comes next, how does the future of work look like?
Well, I think, one thing I'd say is if I could predict the future of work, I could probably afford to be on a different place of the planet right now, enjoying my winnings. But
I will join you. I am there.
Thank you. But I'll tell you, what it is not is the same as today. Okay, if there's one thing you can bet on is it's not today. And even all the Zooming we're doing and all the video pieces is this whole thing has changed into the nature of what can be remote. We talk to companies who are looking at telehealth, for example, back to your point, Osvald. Okay, maybe 15% adoption. All of a sudden, here came COVID. Boom, 70% telehealth. Okay, why? Well, it was the only way to interact with your doctor because they wouldn't see you face to face. And so if you could think about it, the whole idea of remote and what remote means has changed massively. Second of all, it's going to move away from a technical question to a people. Do you feel safe in the physical interaction? Do you feel safe going back to work? Do you feel safe being on an airplane? Okay, that was never the issue. It's not an airplane crashing, it's do I feel safe to it? Okay, but therefore the norms are changing. And I would close by saying, guess what, guys? We've always joked about this, but we just proved in 4 months how much could change around the world in 4 months. All of those curves, I love the Gartner curves. The only thing true about a Gartner curve is if you just keep moving it to the right, the curve is always accurate. Okay, the rate of change in the last 4 months should just somewhat bewilder us, but I think that's the new norm. Okay, so therefore, how do we anticipate and create resilience in how we think?
Kris, so as you are talking about resiliency, I would like to jump in and talk about and pose a question to Sylvain regarding resiliency. In today's world, AI is critical and very much a strategic business opportunity. Companies must remain resilient and competitive and must have ability to successfully build and manage machine learning modules. Why is resiliency so lacking? And how do we get companies to become more resilient with artificial intelligence?
I think we've seen one thing in the COVID situation is that resilience is not there. We've seen all the hiccups with the supply chain and all that. And a lot has been said that, AI was not able to adapt, the systems were out of control. This was all over the place. What I think is that COVID is showing, to the point that was made before, that all systems no longer work because they are not adaptive enough. And we see a huge need for further adaptation because we see markets with high level of uncertainties. We see the pandemic, which is starting up again in some places, stopping in others. And the whole planning and making sense out of the environment is absolutely difficult today. And I'm convinced, and I've experienced that AI is a solution to be able to process all those signals from the market to take real-time decision on how to optimize supply chain. But the only way for this to work is AI, which is working with humans around. You cannot tell an algo or an IT system, hey, be careful, there's a crisis, COVID is coming, please adjust. No, this means nothing. You can tell people who understand AI, who can recode, reparameter, change calibration, how to react. And you see companies who are relying upon, long time series, my shipment from last year, plus some sort of percentage to decide how much I will be shipping this year. This is out. Today, the name of the game with AI and management decision in companies is high frequency data, weak signals you get from market to decide where do you take your bets, where do you decide to reinvest in marketing, what sort of inventory do you want to pile up. Automotive companies, which inventory should we build, where should we ship them? These are critical questions where AI can provide super relevant answers in the high time of uncertainty we are going through.
Sylvain, thank you for the answer. I'd love to jump in here because I think Igor's company and some of his visions for what he's doing is speaking directly to what you're talking about, making company more resilient. This is something that has been, coming at the forefront today of what's going on in every corporation, thinking, my God, the most valuable asset in my company just walked out and now has to work remotely. So I think capturing that muscle memory and knowledge, is extremely important. I think, Igor, could you share a bit with us what you're doing on that front?
Sure. I mean, I think many of us here are espousing a human-centric view of this, and I think the opportunity that we have now in the intelligence age versus the information age is that in the information age, relatively few of us, and certainly all the panelists here, have been able to become data scientists and mathematicians and engineers and what have you. And it turned into a have and have not situation that I've heard some of you express. Now, as the tables have turned, and now we have the compute power and cloud and mobile and all of these style tools, we're able to more democratize access to this style of computing, so that a frontline worker, a dock worker, a cafeteria worker, and anyone you can think of that now suddenly in the last 4 months is so important and now valued. Do you need a data scientist when you're sick, or do you need a nurse, right? If you need to be repaired in quite short order. And so it's turning things around with natural language so that these people's ideas and work products can be absorbed. Certainly with the work from home movement, what we've seen is the fragmentation of these folks, the things that they took for granted that we did well as humans in terms of doing ad hoc collaboration where we could tap each other on the shoulder and then work problems quickly. Those bonds are breaking and fraying. And for anybody that thinks that this is, hey, until the vaccine happens, until the end of the year, or perhaps through the majority of next year, there's some economists that are saying typically when this nation gets pushed into these style of recessions, it's a problem that typically happens every 50 years, and it typically lasts somewhere between 5 to 15 years. And so that's why everybody's harshly looking at their resiliency, and then how do they survive and thrive through this quote unquote new normal that is going to be the actual normal for the next few years.
Yeah, thank you very much, Igor. Those are very good insights. I want to jump from those thoughts to Chetan, also in the world of conversational AI and enterprises. And I want to start this thought with a discussion that was recently written at Forbes article. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, who is not on this call, has summarized the situation during the recent earning call, where he basically proclaimed that companies have completed 2 years worth of digital transformation in just about 2 months. Under the pressure of declining demands and diminishing capital, businesses have invested in automation in order to bolster productivity that didn't quite need the backup as previously before, but they produce significant return on equity and capital. So now AI is stepping in, and the AI is now gaining a leg up. Can you share with us, Chetan, on what you see in the market as digital revolution is taking place and the call of action that we're seeing from Satya Nadella?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I would in advance seek the forgiveness of many of the esteemed panelists, because if I feel like I might be preaching to the choir in this case. But I feel that what has happened and what we are seeing in the marketplace is consistent with what Igor or Sylvain were saying just a moment ago, that you are starting to see that the old model of customer care has collapsed. That building has collapsed. When you have 7 hours of wait time when calling one of the premier providers in Europe, travel, and when you have about 2 hours, 12 minutes with one of the largest banks here, and Kris, you're smiling because you know of some of them, but you know that the customer care is, the old model of customer care is broken down. Now the question is, how do we rebuild this building? And while cash conservancy has become a big mode, and recessionary pressures have caused a lot of the companies to do what classic things do, like draw down on credit lines and try and hold all discretionary spending on one side. But at the board level, what we are finding out, there's a big, huge trust happening saying that since this old model has collapsed, this old building has collapsed of customer care, we need to build this new building digitally. And to be quite direct, this new building should be 35% more cost efficient in its delivery. That's what we're finding across the board. And this is exactly the insurmountable advantage that Ben was talking about. And McKinsey had also talked about the digital Darwinistic curve is being fast forwarded right now. And you start to see a race up that curve from incrementalism, which used to be the earlier call of the day, because a de-risking strategy often tried to talk about incremental changes. And I think now you start to find a much more, not only the fast follower, but you start to find really a leadership position. And you start to find BBVA, for instance, taking 9 million of their subscribers and moving them rapidly into digital service. You find Bankia. Take Spain alone, for instance, in your neighborhood, Sylvain, there is Bankia is number 4, rushing ahead with 3 million of their users into completely digital service. BBVA has 9 million of their users transformed into complete digital service. And the number 1, Santander, is accelerating as well into digital service. So you start to find this race as if somebody has put a fast forward e raised to the power X button on that slow moving digital Darwinistic curve that was unfolding. And you're finding a very fast transition into that digital mode of delivery.
Thank you very much, Chetan. I want to now pose the next question to our expert on supercomputing and billion-dollar data centers. And I see Keith smiling. AI, as Chetan just said, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. And call center operations have been changed forever. AI is changing the billion-dollar data centers and moving them far to the edge, including outer space. It's becoming more democratized, more accessible. Can you share with us and future thinking, what are the next age of AI in terms of GPUs, neuromorphic, quantum? Where is this all going?
Well, one of the cool things about working at NVIDIA is that as much as we're a very growth-oriented company and lots of market activity, it's actually a company that takes a long-term view, and it really plays for the long game. And when Jensen makes an announcement like he did recently on basically our new vision for data center architecture, that wasn't developed in response to the recent pandemic. That wasn't developed this year because it looks like there's a big push. He's been working on that for 3 years, right? I mean, that's the kind of sort of lead time it takes to develop this technology, to develop the frameworks, frankly, to develop the software, not only the hardware. So you really need to think out, many, many years. And where there's a lot of focus on the chips, and look, it's exciting. I mean, we're almost in this renaissance period now of announcements from a lot of startups, as well as some of our big competitors like Intel and AMD on these new chip architectures, not just GPUs, but these other kinds of architectures, right? Like you mentioned, neuromorphic and completely new paradigms of computing like quantum. So there's a lot of really exciting things going on. But they don't necessarily compete with each other. I think that's something people have to understand, that these technologies actually often work side by side. I mean, if you look at our new supercomputer, we have AMD chips, doing what they need to do right next to the GPUs, right? And in our previous generations, we had Intel chips. So it's not sort of CPU versus GPU versus quantum versus FPGA. These different layers of these different architectures, these different approaches actually all have a purpose. And in many cases, you'll find multiple architectures within one data center. But what's really cool is that what Jensen kind of put out to the world last month is that the new unit of computing is the data center itself, right? And so it's not just about a chip or a server or a rack of servers. It's about the entire data center, all being optimized and fine-tuned to enhance the performance. And the impact of that on the world, as you were just saying, you used the word democratized and access. This is taking the cost of performance down 10, 20x, right? And it's enabling smaller companies, startups, and smaller countries, frankly, to get in the game and to be world-class leaders in not just supercomputing and AI, but together, the acceleration of AI, which is not something that's always happening.
Thank you, Keith. As we're discussing this acceleration of AI, Osvald, I remember that when I visited Xynteo Exchange several years ago, you were proudly displaying the human-like digital robot Sophia, which is one of the digital citizens, I think, by Saudi Arabia and other countries. And we even took pictures, we shook hands. So how do you think that artificial intelligence leveraging things like Sophia, like Amelia, and others, how could we solve human problems? How could we recreate this growth with digital growth? And what is this convergence for that chief executive officers need to figure out between humans and machines to solve human problems?
Well, I'm not sure, Mark, that I'm able to answer that big question there with all the world experts on this panel. What I do believe, though, is there is a tremendous need for visionary leaders who are able to transform themselves, their companies, and the wider systems. And after having worked with some of the world-leading technology companies, etc., I think that the real bottleneck and the real opportunity is how you advance enough people who really understand the opportunity around this technology. So I know that this is not perhaps the answer you are interested in, but I would like to mention one or two examples.
Yes, please.
A world-leading trucking company, one of the top companies in the world, they decided to train 3,000 people in the new technology optionality available, only to figure out that when those thousands of people came back, the rest of the organization started to work full-time to basically kill off those people with that new knowledge. So the whole transformational knowledge on how do you do the digital transformation, I think combined with technology is where we really need to go. We look in oil and gas is another example, and I think that Chetan, your company is involved in this, is how do you use digital technology to drive down cost and drive forward efficiency, etc., is very much a human challenge. That's what we are seeing in our, of course, Sophia is just a beautiful image, not as beautiful as I've seen in Chetan's offices, but still, you know, just a sensation. The question is, how do you actually, as leaders, rise to the occasion and drive the change, as we do see in Microsoft and many of the other companies?
I would just say I would agree with Dr. Bjelland that Sophia is prettier to look at, but if you're looking for a beautiful brain, I might propose Amelia.
I think that's what I would have wanted to say.
Yeah, and I want to know, I heard Sylvain discussing, and Sylvain, just please jump in right now.
No, I wanted to just react to what Osvald had just said, like we need visionary leaders. And I also fully agree with what Chetan was saying about those buildings collapsing, like, you know, the customer relationship building. But I think many of the production systems are also collapsing, transport systems are collapsing. And I think the revolution and the fundamental systemic change is coming everywhere. And we need visionary leaders, of course, to understand technology, to trust people who know to push technologies. But the human aspect you are mentioning and the 3,000 people, I think is the core of the issue. We did a survey around the world in 10 OECD countries. When you talk to workers in the workforce across sectors, 80%, 80, express real concerns on AI, ethics, big brother, all those topics. 1/3 say in 5 jobs, my job is gone. And another third is saying, in 5 years, my job is still there, but I'm gone because I don't understand new technology. So when we present all these changes, which are important, which can really improve the world, most of the workforce understands unemployment, you're out, bye-bye. And this need to reconcile the workforce. And to some extent, the citizens in some countries who also have concerns about the impact of AI, with the vision for AI and what is being pushed, either by government, but importantly for companies, I think is one of the key success factors if we want to manage this revolution. And that's where leaders, of course, needs to understand AI, have a vision for AI, but have a vision for people and what it will mean for them, because I think this is the most important ingredient in the whole transformation.
Thank you very much, Sylvain. I want to stay with you as well. You have written and contributed to several pieces, including the piece that we're discussing today, which is the not only digital transformation, but what's happening in our value chain. I know Osvald touched upon it, as well as Chetan, as well as Kris. We've been talking a lot about the issues of digitalization, disruption, and the pandemic caused a lot of it. What do we need to do? Again, what do we need to do to make sure our supply chain is redundant and more resilient? And how does AI really help with this issue? And then you also talk about, Sylvain, in your works and your speeches, you talk about the rise of the AI-powered company in the post-crisis world. How will this company look like? What's the business model?
So on the first point, on how to make value chain and supply chain resilient, AI has a big role to play. The first thing will be getting to much more granular and precise forecast. Forecasting, hedge funds have made billions out of super real-time granular forecast. Investors spend their time on thinking, forecasting. The corporate world, it's been a bit like, the dead spot of the corporate world, which was relying upon, I would say, rather rudimentary forecast. So AI will help by much more forecast to better manage supply chains. Then to test vulnerability and resilience to shock, AI and simulation techniques can also help design more robust systems. But more robust systems will mean more expensive systems. And we need to run them much more efficiently than we've been running the existing system if we want to remain at cost levels which are competitive. And to do that, real-time decision-making optimization engine combined with AI and machine learning can provide very strong support to turn our supply chain into much more resilient supply chains. Now,
thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, go ahead. There's a second part on this AI company.
So AI companies, the new reality, we know it, the economy which will be much more remote. It was discussed, telemedicine versus others. We saw that play out in Asia after the SARS period. So more remote means more data, more digital data on consumer behavior, means more personalization of offer, faster innovation. So in silico innovation versus, in the field innovation, for instance. So, and AI will play a major role here. What will those companies look like? They will be much more agile, less silos. They will be much more, geared toward using AI and technology. And I think they will look more like some of the tech and AI natives we've been having. I think there's a change of mind in leadership, which is extremely important, which is today, basically the mindset is a bit, where could AI help? And let's push where AI can help and make a real difference. I think that the next gen of corporation will be thinking, where does human add value? And how can we make sure we leverage the value add of human? But it's a very fundamental change of mindset and how you look at your processes and at your companies. And I think companies who are closer to that way of thinking probably will be emerging as the winners. And just to conclude, if you look at, recessions in the US since 1996, 15% of companies have been thriving through recessions, being able to increase both levels of margin and revenues. And those companies, those 15%, stands across sectors. It's not like one sector was crashed and one was booming. No, you get between 10 and 20% of companies across sectors with the same pattern where they were both increasing sales and revenues. I'm convinced we'll get to a similar pattern. And it was mentioned the insurmountable advantage that some companies are building. I think this is accelerating. So this will play out exactly the same in this recession. And the ability to master AI and to bring AI at scale and to land it in the hands of the people and to combine it with a human experience and intelligence will make the difference between those who are in the 15% and the other one.
Thank you very much, Sylvain. I know that I see that Kris. Okay, I'm sorry, Keith. Go ahead, Keith, please.
Well, I wanted to add actually another example of resilience just based on the question that you had. And Sylvain may not like this example because it does kind of cut against this notion of humans first. Don't punish the messenger, because it's not my strategy. But in my role and working with different ministers, and ministries around the world, one conversation we had last month with the Ministry of Transportation, and I won't name the country, but it's in Asia, and they made the observation that the pandemic really brought to light how vulnerable their public transit system is as a result of obviously the role that humans play, right? And in this particular case, it was bus drivers, and they rely heavily on the busing system to support their economy, for people to get to work, and because of the pandemic, because of the need to shut down, the impact on the transit system greatly amplified the impact on the economy. And so they were already looking at autonomous vehicles, but I think when they came into 2020, their main thought was, well, autonomous vehicles would be great for passenger safety, but now they've accelerated their focus on autonomous buses, and their main focus is resilience in their public transit system. So in this case, they want to remove reliance on humans, to some degree, frankly, not have, just have fewer, if no, human bus drivers, so that their main sort of transit system can survive an event like a pandemic and continue to bring people around, even if, or just, that idea. I just want to share that. So, the idea of resilience in AI in the public sector is taking on a new kind of dimension.
Thank you, Keith. I just want to stay with you. You are focusing on the forefront. And I know that Osvald and Chetan and Sylvain and Kris and everybody on the line, Igor, all of us care about the national AI programs. We will have a special session on it, but I wanted to pick your brain. You spend a lot of time advising the national AI journeys and working with them. What are some of those plans that you are seeing? Are those plans the roadmaps that are covering everything in critical infrastructure that we could count on? And who are the leaders in those national AI plans? Why is it out front, and why does it even matter to talk about the national AI plans? Not all that we're discussing a lot of enterprise systems and how the businesses are focusing, but do we need to care about the national AI?
Yeah, well, first off, the plans are starting to look very similar, right? There's about 50 of them out there now, and when I personally got involved 2 years ago in that sort of that landscape, there were only about a dozen plans, and it was kind of a leading edge thing to do. I mean, today, 50 to 60 countries have national AI plans. A lot of them are kind of modeled off of each other at this point. So you're starting. There's a lot of common focus. So that's, but that's not to say they're not important. I mean, if you don't have a strategy, quite frankly, from an NVIDIA's perspective, we won't even really engage with a country at the national level if they don't have a strategy. There's almost no point, if they haven't taken the time to go through that consultative process, to talk to stakeholders, to think through their strategy, even if they begged and borrowed and used all the sort of language from other countries, having gone through that process and adopted a national AI strategy, that's a milestone policy-wise. So I think it is important. But your other question of why does it matter, or does it even matter who's out front? I want to make a specific point on that, which is I'm not sure that it does matter. It's very hard to compare what India is doing to what Sweden's doing to what Mexico's doing. I mean, there are some clear sort of indicators of maturity, right? Like having certain data governance things in place, having national sort of adopting standards at the national level, and so there are things that, and frankly, making investments in their data infrastructure, the data centers, the fiber, the supercomputers, all the things, right? So there are definitely things you want to look for, but I don't think this is an arms race, right? This isn't one country versus the other so much. Each country has to really make these investments because it's important to the future of their country. They do also have to compete with other countries, that's true. But I don't think they're going to compete all on the same basis. And then there's so many dimensions to AI, so many fields and disciplines within AI. They don't all have to win. They don't all have to own it all. So, a small country can be the leaders in one very small field, like Canada is the clear leader in deep learning, fundamental deep learning research. Not the largest country on earth, but the leader in one of the most important areas. So I think that you'll see the countries across the world. I mean, I just signed a deal on Saturday with the Prime Minister of Serbia to be their national AI partner. I mean, this is a relatively small country, but they have, they have their ambitions. They've built a state data center. They are putting in a supercomputer. They have 4 universities with computer science programs. So you don't need to be, the U.S., Germany, UK, or the U.S. to be a world leader in an aspect of AI. So I'm not sure winning will matter, but taking it seriously matters, and investing matters as well.
Thank you, Keith. What a message. And with this message, it comes down to leadership. And I know Osvald is smiling because, he leads a program where he actually coaches and collaborates and co-creates with some of the top leaders around the world, including the leadership from Verizon and others. So Osvald, as we're talking about the leadership, post-coronavirus, now with Digital Future, we all spoke about this exciting digital future, which is focused on accelerated pace. As, again, Microsoft CEO kept saying, 2 years of digital transformation in 2 months, boxed in. How do we get the leadership of enterprises to prepare? What do we do to prepare as leaders on this call? How do we react as this needs to happen very quickly? How do we reinvent leadership for digital age?
So thank you, Mark. I would love to give a very simple answer to this. And I think it was Einstein who once said that everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. And of course, leadership has always emerged over time. I think there's a lot in what Keith is saying that, and it's very beautiful. The world is a very big place. And you have to take every industry, every company, every country from where it is into the future. So what I believe, what we will see are 3 things. One is we need accelerated learning. We need to broaden our horizon and understand more what's possible across our industries, outside our industry. Number 2, we need to form unconventional partnerships, like perhaps what some people are involved in here. And number 3, we need to move forward fast, even though there is an enormous amount of uncertainty. And these kind of characteristics, I think, can bring us forward at this time of enormous challenge.
Thank you, Osvald. As you always say, you can't move forward without looking at the future generation. And you can't move forward without taking care of the precious people that are on this planet, our kids in the future. That's the reason we're all putting all of our energies and passion on this call today. And with this in mind, I want to pass this to my colleague and a really extreme evangelist for the Gen Z movement, Angelica, to discuss the Gen Z and the push on digitalization.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mark, for the introduction. I just want to pose a general question. I would love to hear everybody's insights who's on the panel with us today. I want to shift the conversation to societal change, impact, and workplace culture, which is a big thing right now. Numerous studies from McKinsey to even BCG have mentioned that Gen Z is willing to give up personal information in order to bring about social good and societal advancement, which is an important foundation for ethical AI. Ethical AI is everything that we think about right now in responsible AI implementations. So that being said, will the mindset of social good and willingness to give up data for good essentially boost efforts in ethical AI solutions to coronavirus? I'm really curious to hear everybody's perspectives on this, and I welcome anybody to answer from the floor.
Let me take a stab at that. This is Igor. So I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's in all of our best interest in order to find highly private ways of transacting personal information, and it's going to be more a have and have-nots of trust, right? So any platform that continues evaporating the trust of their user base is not going to exist in the long haul. And so you'll always have that duality working together where people do want to use more and gain the benefits of that computation and those resources in order to discover new solutions to personal problems, community problems, and national and international problems. At the same time, it's going to be the companies and nations that figure out the duality of maintaining the individuality of their citizenry that are going to be benefiting the most. And I think that's the expectation that people want. And I get where I think Osvald brought in, the electorate tends to be a lagging indicator, right? They tend to not put certain leaders in place until a pandemic already exists, until there's some tragedy or conflict or crisis already exists. They don't tend to work these solutions ahead of time. Now, of course, there's a great many bureaucrats and in public-private partnerships where we work in tandem with them to prepare them for future threats. But in many of the elected leaders, it tends to be after the fact, right? And so how many years was Amazon, Google, and the rest of them already in business, and yet we still had senators talking about the internet being a series of tubes, right? And now I will say, AI is being viewed as an existential threat, and you see already international threats in terms of whoever corners that ends up in a dominant position, and so it's already permeating in the fabric where people are not even just worried about it from a militaristic standpoint, but also in terms of, will I even have a job? The thing that I say is, if you want a better pizza or great pizza, grow better tomatoes. And so one of the things that I'm heartened about the generation that's rising is the fact that they're used to dealing with vast swaths of information, processing them, and also collaborating in a networked way, which I do believe is the proper operating system for this new world that's waiting for them. So that at least is going to be helped with all of the tools that the panelists here are working on.
On the Gen Z, leading BCG Gamma, I've got a good representation of the Gen Z data science population with close to 1,000 people. And of course, there is the notion of giving and sharing data, which is important. And we see this with the track and trace system. But the thirst to contribute is very strong. And two examples maybe which are worth mentioning. During the COVID crisis, we've helped a number of governments, like more than 20 governments. And at some point in time, we had more than 100 of people in our teams who had signed on to help and to work on some projects on top of their day jobs, because they had the very specific knowledge and expertise to help in certain of those crisis situations. And we've seen a sort of fly from our Gen Z cohort to do this type of support on their free time just to contribute. Another one beyond data is working on open source. I think AI is heavily relying upon open source more than many of the other techno field. And here you also see a lot in this generation about making sure that they can outsource what they do, open source, what they do, contribute to open source ecosystems and all that. So even beyond personal data, there's a lot which is done by this generation in tech.
Thank you very much, Sylvain. I want to jump, and we will do a roundtable recap, Angelica and Ben. But I want to jump to a question that also resonates to the younger generation, but also resonates to the 40 million Americans that have filed for COVID-19 right now. The World Economic Forum predicted by 2025 the humans will make up only 48% of the workforce. Digital workers accounting for 52%. McKinsey, BCG has sketched the progression now along the digital Darwinism curve, rating them from being experimentalist, fast follower to a leader. In addition to those predictions, Innosight predicted 50% of the current S&P 500 companies to fall off the list, completely fall off the list by 2027. COVID-19 is showing that if we don't maximize at those speeds, our tomorrow will not be great. Our tomorrow may not even exist. So digitalization, automation are filling all those gaps. Chetan, from the introduction and the thinking, the background that I just gave, was COVID-19 the wake-up call for the world? And if it is the wake-up call, what are the key drivers that are going to reinvent the digital economy?
Well, I think it's just the catalyst that has galvanized a very fast movement towards that future that everybody in the panelists has described, perhaps, and articulated better than I could. I'd say the one thing that is true is that, and listen, the World Economic Forum, exactly what you said, 52%, and I think the job creation that you talked about, 40 million, we all know the numbers from World Economic Forum. There's 125 million new and 75 million displacement, yielding a net new of about 50 million jobs still being created. Yeah, so we know that. I think what the big challenge is you're going to have a hybrid workforce. We know that. But if you look at the hybrid workforce, and I continue to believe that by 2025, you will pass somebody in the hallway and you won't be able to tell if it's a human or an android. And to Angelica's point, this is going to be the big equalizer anyway, because when you talk about the fact that the forms of not just, we are in a very polarized society today, I think you're going to find carbon and silicon, when the macro levels of carbon and silicon itself become indistinguishable, when the forms of carbon and forms of silicon start to become indistinguishable, that becomes like a much more hybrid workforce that will start prevailing by 2025. And so the question is, what is happening and why are we having some stumbling blocks? It goes back to McCarthy days, because, and I think Igor would agree with that. John McCarthy himself had said like that when he said like for most part, we would have achieved cloning of human intellect. And he said that the problem turned out to be a lot harder than anticipated. And I see Igor smiling because I think anybody who has been wrestling with this for 3 decades would tell you that the problem turned out to be a lot harder than anticipated. And Kris Fitzgerald will tell you that most of the AI community, he's quite blunt, particularly after a nice Côte d'Ivoire. He'll tell you that all you guys have done is faked it. You basically have put a classification engine, which is deep neural network models actually allow you to classify what is being said, as opposed to comprehension engine. Humans, and to be able to get to that level, you need comprehension. And comprehension is what is the breakthrough that is coming in artificial intelligence today, which will allow us to be able to have a real deep understanding, not the hamburger menu equivalent understanding, which is only in the happy case scenarios, which classification allows you to be able to deal with the happy case scenarios. With real life, 86% of the exceptions that come in either what Sylvain was talking about, the supply chain, or in the customer care, 86% of the exceptions come in are related to comprehension. Nobody's calling the phone company. Over 207,000 calls came in to Telefonica yesterday, were fielded with over 89% resolution. Now, nobody called the phone company in Peru yesterday saying, oh, what's my account balance or what's my hamburger menu? They were always calling about a conflict resolution and about a billing dispute that they wanted to be able to have it addressed. And that's the challenge, that's the frontier of artificial intelligence. You can actually jump from classification to comprehension. And that's the distinguishing factor about what we have been researching and what I have been researching with like-minded scholars from Stanford and others that take the equation to that human understanding level to really gestate the new hybrid workforce, which will become the big equalizer. I believe that the future is very nice and bright when all of us are living in a very nice, happy hybrid environment tomorrow.
Well, thank you very much for those thoughts and the call to action. And with this in mind, I would like to pass this on to Ben Levy to bring the Silicon Valley perspective and what is going on with Silicon Valley and how it's touching the rest of the world, and the effect of creating technologies for productivities, efficiencies, automation, changing for societal good, for all of us, for citizens, to make our life better post-COVID-19, and with Angelica to create a recap together with every one of you about what we have discussed today as we continue our conversation. So I'm passing it on to Ben.
Thank you, Mark. I mean, that's been a fantastic conversation. I mean, it's hard to feed and capture all the insights provided here, again, world experts in their domains. From Silicon Valley, I mean, I'd say a few things. I mean, we heard Osvald earlier talking about leadership and the importance of core values. We've heard about taking, big stab at a few things that truly matters. I think, leadership needs to start really looking at what matters and where do they stand in this world. I mean, we talk about fight for resources and models of capitalism that are taking more than are giving back. We're talking about reallocations of wealth and value being created. Where AI is projected. Take your survey, but $14 trillion in value creation, 40% productivity improvements in the bottom line of corporations that are the early adopters. And by the way, wake up people, because AI, has been used by Google, Amazon's, and Facebook and others for the last 5 to 6 years. And you talk about insurmountable advantages. These companies have been already doing it for a long time. And so if you're a corporate leader today, you need to really start focusing on what matters. Where do you stand as a leader, as a corporation? What are your core values? And then start thinking about how do you start implementing that. And I think putting people at the very center is ultimately going to win. And I don't know if it's a fight versus carbon and atoms and silicon. Frankly, I don't like the idea to put AI against machine. This is the narrative Hollywood has had for too long. We need a new narrative that says, look, it's about augmented intelligence. And the reason we invested in Igor's company is because his vision was not to make human irrelevant. It's to, we like to call that really augmented intelligence. It's like, use humans for what they're incredibly good at and use machine for what they're incredibly good at. It's not one versus the other. It's one with the other doing so much more. But ethic is a problem. Quality of data is a problem. And prioritization of where you start doing things. And Gen Z, it's about people. The buildings have collapsed, not just the customer, the supply chain. And this is why this series is going to be fantastic to address in deeper ways, what's happening in healthcare with AI, what's happening in the transportation supply chain. But very specifically here, your number one resource has walked out of your building. It's not Elvis that walked out, it's your employees. And so finding a way to keep them engaged, productive, and driving change faster is extremely important. $65 billion has been invested in AI alone in the last 3 years, since 2017, and that's just venture capital. As a corporation, I ask you, as a leader, how much have you invested? The leaders today are acquiring companies that are in AI, they're investing in AI companies, and it's not so much to gain access to the technology as much as it is to access to their people and the visionaries behind that. I think people often underestimate that aspect. Some of the smartest corporations and leaders that came to us every year come to us in Silicon Valley to meet with us to understand what are the trends in AI, because we're one of the most active VC in the industry. And this one of the smartest one came not with their CTO and corp dev team. They were there, but they brought the HR people. And they asked us, how are Silicon Valley companies scaling and attracting the talent the way they are and retaining them? Because we have a leadership problem, we have an aging problem. And I think most corporations today struggle with that, frankly. It's about changing culture and mindsets. And I think why we love what we do in venture is because we work with entrepreneurs that have realized they want to impact this world positively, create a change, and actually driving it every day. And so we are at the forefront and see the future a bit before other people. And we want that to be distributed as fast as possible. So all of you here play a big role in that. And I think we're all passionate behind it. So again, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you. With this in mind, I would like to pass this to Angelica for final thoughts, and then from Angelica for everyone that participated today to provide final thoughts and the call to action to the leadership of the CEOs, chief digital officers, policymakers on some of the action items that we need to really work on digital transformation. So Angelica, to you and the rest of our distinguished group.
Absolutely. Well, it was a true pleasure to have everybody on the show today. Ben, thank you for articulating these things, and Mark for really diving deep into AI and enterprise applications. I just want to conclude this series by asking everyone for just final few words on their thoughts, and then we will conclude this incredible series. And we're so fortunate that we were able to have so many leaders in the enterprise world all over the globe being able to participate and provide value in this very important discussion.
Okay, with this in mind, Angelica, I would like to go through the participants for the final few words. And that's, we start with Igor.
Thank you. So our call to action is as follows. As we have this fragmentation and heterogeneous environments, it's finding that perfect fusion of people and all this compute power that many of you are creating to benefit them. But in reality, we have to start from solving basic business problems, right? If you don't have a problem that drives a business case, it doesn't matter. We can't just show up selling something like a toy out of a store. And so, what's the product that they're building? How do they sell it? And then how do they service it and do that over and over again? I also want to discount fear. And the reason why I discount fear is in the same way that no parent should be afraid of their children. It's our purpose to create tools in order to benefit our communities, and that's what all of us have collectively done. At the same time, we do have to understand the ethical ramifications of our work to make sure that it's we amplify the positive uses and we depress any sort of negative and certainly second order effects. And the third point I have to say is we can imagine beyond ourselves. You know, there's a human arrogance to make machines think like us, and we're not giving them their just credit. If I look at the renaissance that we've seen in the last 10 years, Fred Jelinek, who of John Hopkins fame, who was the mentor to our chief technology officer, said airplanes don't flap their wings. And so one of the things that I've seen all of you do now, and all of the software that we've seen, and as you mentioned, Canada's leading position in deep learning, is the fact now we have hardware and software that doesn't process things the way that we would have normally thought of processing them, and it's better. So we have to each use our different different strengths, and the more cohesive that you can make, you know, people in performing the work and all of the information, right? But in a way that an enterprise can still manage their work, I think they'll end up having that insurmountable advantage that the panel here discussed. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Igor. Thank you for the leadership. Chetan, for your follow-up thoughts and call to action.
I would completely agree with Igor that we have to get rid of this fear factor that, you know, it's always been the ultimate creator, and this Hollywood-induced fear is just not belongs here. And we've always seen that technology is the creator of jobs, but we should not be trying to play the technology. Man should not be trying to continue to say, I'm going to continue to drive a horse and carriage, and I'm going to continue farming. Man has to move up the value chain. We have to realize that the hybrid workforce, we have to know that calls are going to be handled by the customer care is going to be done by machines for large part, and escalations will happen where humans will come in. Humans are going to move up to higher forms of creative expression, and machines will take care of all mundane chores. Are we not shackled by the ordinary? What is the point of having creativity, likes of which you have assembled, myself excluded in this call, if any given day, less than 30% of your creative brain is actually engaged? Because 70% of your creative brain is lost in doing mundane chores every day. What a colossal waste of such an 88 billion neurons that exist in such brains. They should be shouldn't we be freed to be able to exert, to be able to engage in creative expressions, have technology provide us the concept of minimum viable incomes that, of course, France, I was in Palais de Luxembourg, where the French Senate seems to be very, very strongly advocates this. And of course, Nordics, we know, has championed this in Dr. Bjelland's neighborhood. And that technology productivity goes up 40%. We are able to provide that technology being the most faithful servant that man has known as man elevates himself to higher forms of creative expression. And we are already seeing this by the way, in banking, we're seeing this in 7 out of the top 10 banks. In insurance, we are seeing 150-year-old largest mutual life insurance company completely reinvent its whole supply chain. Sylvain, you were talking about it, and its whole customer care, by using technology and elevating itself to give different new forms of services and originations that they hadn't done earlier. And that's where humans excel, creative thinking. That's where we should leave that to humans, and we should elevate that to humans and leave the mundane common chores to technology.
Thank you very much, Chetan, for those words of wisdom and vision. Keith, what would you say? That's something that we need to call to action, that we as leaders need to take. And what are your final thoughts?
Well, it's hard to follow all these great comments. Listen, the last couple of years, again, there's been all this great action around developing strategies, developing plans, developing an understanding of what these technologies can do. I think we have to move into that next phase of actual implementation and adoption. And that's why the pandemic has had quite a profound impact on the world in that sense. It has accelerated adoption, and we have to see more of it. One of my concerns about national AI plans, and the reason why these are important, and you asked this question, Mark, earlier on, I didn't completely answer it, is national AI plans by themselves are not important, but what's important is what countries do with them. And, in a lot of countries, the public sector is the dominant employer. The public sector isn't just another sector of the economy; it is the defining sector of the economy. So the governments, when they take action, it isn't incidental to the commercial activity. It often drives and catalyzes, commercial and private sector activity. So national AI plans as a proxy for action are important. And what I see going forward, and my hope will happen, is that the BCGs and the IPSofts and the entrepreneurs, Igor, like yourself and Ben, and the investors, that this ecosystem will really work with the public sector to advance what they're doing. I was just on the phone this morning with the Sovereign Cloud, sort of the national CSP for a country in Northern Europe, and they said very clearly that they can't really execute much without close collaboration with the private sector, and that you really need a coming together. You really need that collaboration, not just talk, but actual, joint execution. And I think that's going to be the model, sort of multi-cloud, hybrid, private sector, public sector getting together, not just on the policy side, but also on the action side, the deployment side. That's how we're going to that's how we're going to realize that $14 trillion in value.
Thank you very much, Keith. This multilateral, multi-cloud hybrid approach, no man is an island, I think is very, very useful for us. And with this, I want to pass this to Sylvain to give us the guidance that you see from hundreds, thousands of executives around the world, and what you're picking up, and some of the key action items for all of us to think about.
Companies who master AI, they make huge returns. This was said, they invest even more. It's going to be very difficult to catch up with them. So companies have no choice. They have to jump into this AI train. 3 things maybe for them to do it. The first one is really focused on a few big things and make a real difference. Don't hedge over multiple bets. It makes no sense. Second thing, the people element we talked about a lot, which is reconciling the workforce, the citizens with technology, because technology is bringing a brighter future if it's pushed by visionary leaders. And the third one would be to bet on the Gen Z generation. I think that revolution will be, pushed, driven, made possible, enabled by the younger generation. And I think that's also a change in the mindset that needs to come in leadership, which is trust and bet on Gen Z.
Thank you very much, Sylvain. And finally, but with an impressive mindset that I'm sure will capture all of us, is Osvald. Osvald, from your perspective, where you are in the beautiful country of Norway, which we're admiring now, looking at this background, you, as I mentioned at the beginning, been focusing pretty much most of your life on improving the growth model. And the growth model, which is collapsing or not working right now, whether we're in digital or physical world, destructive forces are short-term wins, not long-term prosperity, and not focusing on natural resources, all of that widening exclusion. What are your final thoughts on driving this new growth? How do we drive this new growth? What action items do we need to take?
So Mark, thank you very much. First of all, I consider my contribution here very modest. It's a phenomenal evening for me here in Oslo to be with you guys. But I do have 3 reflections. Number 1 is, if you look at COVID-19, and if you look at realize that it's not going to be fixed for anyone unless it's fixed for everyone. And that's like a global problem. So if we don't fix it for everyone, it's not really going to work out. So we need to realize that we need to step up our vision and our understanding and broaden our understanding of what are the problems we would like to solve. Number 2, I would like to advocate a renaissance in the relationship between government and global companies. Out of the 100 largest economies in the world, I think about 70 are companies. You have you have some few well-run countries. Many of them are corrupt or broke, but we depend on each other, and we need to make those relationships work as much as possible. Number 3, and I see great hope in this, basically all of this transformation comes down to trust, human values, and character. And I think here we need to start with ourselves and lead from the front, as you are doing on this panel. And from that point of view, I see a huge leverage and great hope. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody, for participating in this panel discussion on digital transformation in the wake of COVID. It was a true honor to have everybody here. Every single one of you contributed tremendously to this discussion. And we look forward to sharing all of your incredible insights with our audience. And we hope that this will spark greater conversation about the need to really focus on digital transformation in this new age. And I hope that this serves as an inspiration for the younger generation, as a call to arms to really take this seriously and to move forward in the right direction as we reinvent and reload our post-COVID future. So again, thank you so much all for joining us today.